Okay, Jack, Andrew, or Ryan? Anybody? Any of those? Okay. I am going to attempt to Zoom these lectures as well. Now, in that way, there's a Zoom recording of it, which isn't notoriously good, but I was thinking in case of a problem with this thing, I wanted to have a backup. So and I'll send it an email and I'll try to Zoom the rest of the classes as well. So the way it works is you can't interact. It's it's just basically like a video. As you can see, I've got the black screen on. So anyway, just to let you know that if something comes up and you can't be in class, if you want to, you can watch it through the Zoom by just getting to the. Did I already tell you that? Maybe I didn't tell this class, but I just have a personal meeting ID, so you don't get a request. But the personal meeting ID is just the phone number, which is my college phone number, 517-607-2376. And then the password is just Wolfram with a little W. So you can just get into it by just launching yourself into it. In fact, when I was doing this I've been doing it with the 11 o'clock, my Econ 105 class, and when I was starting to see if I could do it, I was having my wife see if she could get in, and the way it had been set up was inadvertently, my voice wasn't coming out, but people who signed in came in. So I'm about 15 minutes into the lecture, and then I hear this. My wife called my daughter to see, because she couldn't hear me, so she called my daughter to see if she could help. So I'm in the middle of my lecture, and I hear like a Zoom bomb where my wife is going, "Elizabeth, Daddy's trying to do this Zoom lecture, and I can't figure out how to get the sound." So fortunately, there's 2 students in the 11 o'clock that are IT people, and we went over and shut it off. But anyway, we're going to try to do that. All right, I got to remember to put my thing on. Okay, for this week, the classic album of the week is, because we got behind on them, is Simon and Garfunkel, "Sounds of Silence." This has, is a famous song, Sounds of Silence, and Most Peculiar Man is on here. I Am a Rock is on here, and I believe this was 1965, somewhere around there. So anyway, yeah, 1965. So this was, obviously you hear more about Paul Simon than Art Garfunkel, but this is probably their classic album. This one is in stereo, which in those days you have some in monaural and some in stereo. And in addition, I just came across, because it was right near there, I had the Van Morrison album, but a lot of people don't know that Van started out in a band called Them, and there was a song called Gloria, which you might have heard, Gloria, Gloria. Anyway, so here is Them, double album, before Van Morrison became famous as Van Morrison. And in fact, it's a bonus pack 2-record set. So this is a real classic. You won't find hardly anybody. And I paid $3.60 for it back in the day. All right. So last time we were talking about just some observations about tort law, and we talked about, what happens if you, should you have more than one person that's involved in the accident, and how can we make it, again, you want to set up so people pay proper precaution. If you do the law this way, this might happen. If you do the law this way, it might happen. And again, there's no explicit way of doing it, but just give you guidance. Like sometimes you know, okay, this is probably going to work better than this. So when we talked about joint and several liability was one of the things we focused on. And what did that mean? Joint liability meant I could sue everybody involved. I can sue the hospital, I can sue the doctor, I can sue the anesthesiologist, and that way I don't really have to know. There might be situations where it would be very difficult for me to know who actually caused the accident. And then it sort of shifts to the defendants to work out how they weren't involved in the accident, rather than you having to prove the anesthesiologist was the one that caused the accident. Second observation we made was that if you can sue the people that are, if you have several liability, I can sue each party individually, and then I can sue the person that has the most likelihood of paying me back, right? So I could sue the county because they're most likely to be able to do that. And again, we used the Michigan State example with the Nassar problem. Michigan State paid $500 million. Well, Nassar himself wasn't going to be able to pay $500 million. And so then if you have contribution, then the parties that got sued have to go to the other parties to try to get their share, if you have it with contribution, to say, no, this person was 40% liable, and so then they got to go and get the 40% in the other person. And we noticed that if you have no contribution, then again, just like anything else, then the potential injurers all are going to have an incentive to take proper precaution. But the problem is, the victims may be better off by getting injured and being able to sue full compensation from everybody, right? So you just have to think through what would be the optimal way to do it. And then we noted, lastly, trouble in computing damages. I mean, when we were talking about tort law in general, we say, yeah, that might be difficult to do, because to do it correctly, what do I want to do? I don't want to give people perfect compensation, right? Because then you will know what A is, that A we've been talking about, because we want everybody to set W equal P prime of X times A. If I know what A is, then I'll get doing efficient precaution. But what do you do if there's no realistic market in what's happening? And we use the example of you kill somebody. How do you attach a value to the life, right? And then the authors suggested that you might use the general idea that if we know what W is, we know how much it costs to get an airbag, and we know what P of X is, then we might be able to figure out what A is. I can just solve for A. And so, again, rather than just sort of guessing what the value of a life is, you might use that as a mechanism to try to get you there. This last comment that we want to talk about is punitive damages. And just the last thing we're going to talk about is punitive damages. And that is, can I award damages that are basically a punishment for the party that caused the injury? Normally, it's like for malicious behavior. It might be for fraud. It might be for wanton or willful behavior. So it's a punishment to the party that's causing the injury. Of course, if you do that, you say, okay, listen, this was just out of realm what you guys just did, or what you did as an individual. Then we're going to not only award the damages to the person that was injured and compensate them, but we're going to put something on top of it. We're going to put punitive damages, so you, as the potential injurer, know that if you do something that's fraudulent or willful and wanton and malicious behavior, right? You know that you're going to get some extra payment that you're going to have to make. One of the bad things about that is it creates uncertainty, right? Like, I don't know if I'm out there what the punitive damages might be, right? again, if we keep coming back to this, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to get, right? I'm trying to set W equal to P prime of X times A. But if I don't know what A is, because, if I'm a potential injurer and I don't know what A is, then I'm not likely to get that correct, right? So if you create uncertainties, then it makes it hard for the potential injurer to set the proper precaution. But on the other hand, it means that it could be a sort of an enforcement error. If we think about this, an enforcement error. I don't know how to put it exactly, but a positive solution to this. That is, suppose that, and what I mean by enforcement error is that suppose that the average person doesn't know that there was a quality damage or a quality inefficiency in making the product, right? So you don't know that the chainsaw just wasn't put together very well. So what'll happen is you won't sue, right? But it may be that the courts may have gone out and said, oh my gosh, you might have an administrator. We're talking about who might set these standards. You might have a regulator that goes out and says, oh no, this is what you have to do to avoid paying the damages. So it may be that still there's people that just don't know this, and we haven't set it up correctly so that the manufacturer has to bear all the burden, like we talked about earlier. So if there's some uncertainties where you guys don't know, then what might happen is it's a positive solution to this enforcement error, which is that the victims may be unaware of the lack of precaution of the injurer. And so if you, the injurer, know that exists, right? If you, the injurer, know that there's going to be a lot of the people that you are causing to be injured, a lot of them aren't going to know that they were the cause of the injury, then what will happen is you won't take sufficient precaution. So it may be that the court or administrator could say, oh my gosh, you guys are committing fraud, and we're going to slap this on top of it, right? Or this is malicious what you're doing, and we're going to slap that on top of it. So again, there's positive and negatives, and there may be certain situations where you're pretty sure that we ought to put something on there for fraud, and that will be better than if we didn't do it and you had all sorts of a lack of enforcement. Okay, so basically, again, you're trying to get it so that the potential injurer is going to take sufficient precaution. And if you have punitive damages, you upset the certainty about what A is, but you may offset that there's lower amounts of suits that are coming, and so there's less enforcement of the problems that you're causing. All right, so that finishes the tort liability section. Now we're going to move into contract law. And remember that what's going on in tort law is you can't bargain, right? It's about accidents, right? Tort law is pretty much about you can't bargain. I can't say, oh gee, I'm about to crash into you. Can you swerve out of my way, please? Right? I'll pay you to swerve out of my way, and that way, then if there's an accident, then there won't be an accident, and I won't have to pay the compensation for wrecking your car. Right? Can't do that. But contract law is where you can bargain. Right? So we're looking at Chapter 8. And again, we're going to introduce the economic concepts that we're going to be dealing with in contract law, and then chapter 9 is what? It's just like we're always doing. Okay, let's take a deeper look at some particular aspect of the thing that we were already talking about. So let's think about, the idea that this is about bargaining, right? It's about bargaining, and so the question is, first thing, what in this bargain, what promises are going to be, what is a contract? It's about a promise, right? I'm going to repair the roof on your house, and then you're going to pay me, okay? So it's about a bargain between the two of us, and then the question that first comes up, what promises should be enforced? Right? Well, the idea is that it should be enforceable if it's part of a bargain, okay? If we've made this bargain, then it should be enforceable, okay? If it's part of a bargain. And then the question is, okay, what constitutes a bargain, right? Right? What is a bargain that we're going to enforce? Well, we got three aspects of what constitutes a bargain. First of all, there's an offer that's made. Okay? The second thing is there's an acceptance, right? You make an offer, I accept it. And the third thing is there was consideration, or there was a payment. Now, the offer could be verbal, or it could be written, right? You've probably heard about, it was settled with a handshake, okay? So we don't have a written contract here. It was just, we agreed, we shook hands, and that's it. So it could be verbal, or it could be written, okay? Now, you buy somebody's house, you probably want it written, right? If it's something, again, it's, this is just, so it gives you some guidance, right? When we were talking about title to property, right? You have titles to a car, you have titles to a house, but you don't have titles to your, to your classic album, right? I don't have a title that tells me about it. Now, if this were a some sort of classic that was worth $1 million for some reason, right? Then I'd want to go out and make sure I had a title to it somewhere so I could prove it was mine if somebody took it, right? So, so again, when do you want to have title to something? Now, notice that what would happen if you had an offer and acceptance but no consideration? Would that be enforceable? That is, I ask you out on a date, and you accept, and you show up at 7 o'clock at, I don't know where you'd show up, Hillsdale Brewing or someplace, right? And I'm not there. I just, hey, I forgot about it. Or I decided, nah, I'm not really interested, right? Is that an enforceable contract? And the answer would be no, because there was no payment, right? And so, so you need sort of three aspects of that. And what when we're talking about who's what on each side of the bargain, we have a promisor and you have a promisee, right? There's only one S, promisor. You have a promisor and you have a promisee. Now, the promisor gives the promise, okay? The promisee is the one that receives the promise. Right? So there's an offer, there's an acceptance, right? Now, the promisor would receive something from the promisee in order to get them to make the promise. So if you sort of think about it, the sort of in a technical term, the promisee pays the promisor think about this, pays the promisor to induce them to deliver. Right? And so I'm giving you, you buy something on eBay, right? The person promises to send you whatever the product is, and how do you get them to do it? You pay them, right? And so the promisee is going to say, hey, I want you to promise to fix my house, right? Or I want you to promise to deliver me a car, or I want you to promise to buy my car or something like that. So you give them money for them to fulfill some sort of promise that they're going to make. So what happens if I say, gee, I'm going to give you, $20,000, and you promise to give me a used pickup truck, okay? And what happens is there's a misunderstanding. You think that you're really supposed to give me your SUV. We haven't made it clear that we're dealing with an SUV versus a pickup truck. So what if there's a mistake, a mutual misunderstanding? If there's a mutual misunderstanding, then what do? If there's a mutual misunderstanding, you just say, oh, we're going to restore the situation to what it was before the bargain happened, right? We're just going to restore the situation to before the bargain. So what happens is then the promisor is going to give the money back to the promisee, basically, right? So the promisor gives the money back, and the promisee returns the product, or whatever it was. The promisee returns the product. I mean, this is a particular example of a bargain, but the idea is that you just put the situation back to where it was, right? You give them back the keys to the car, or you take the car back to Stillwell Ford, and they give you your money back, right? So you just put people back into that, whatever that situation is. So whatever the bargain was about, the promisee gets their money back, and the promisor doesn't have to do whatever they promised to do, okay? So then the question becomes, what should be the remedy for breach of contract? What happens if we had a contract and then I, the promisor, don't deliver, okay? So, and you can see where this is going to be headed, right? Same thing as we've been talking about before with like tort law, right? You want people to take proper precaution, right? So what do you do about what should do about breach of contract, right? What should be the remedy for breach? That is the breach of the contract. The promisor. So think about it. The promisor does not deliver. Well, if we were thinking about it a little bit, you'd give them, instead of giving them perfect compensation, right? Under contract law, what are you going to do? You're going to give them the expectation damages, right? The expectation damages. And what is that? Expectation damages are what would you have benefited if the bargain had gone through, right? What the promisee would have benefited from the bargain, right? Well, the promisee would have benefited from the bargain. So again, if you sort of think about that, that makes some sense, right? It's basically the expectation damages are what you're doing. So if I would have been, and remember in a bargain, what happens is you have this surplus, right, from the cooperation that happened. When I sell you my, going back to the property rights thing, if I sell you my guitar for $500, then you must have valued it for $500, and I must have valued it for at least $500, and I must have valued it for less than the $500. So there must have been some cooperative surplus that happened, and it gets divided depending on who has the most bargaining strength. If you think back to what we were talking about under property law. So similarly here, there's going to be some benefit from this bargain happening. And so you, let's say you were going to benefit from you showing up with your band at my venue. You were going to benefit by $2,000 from your band. I was going to benefit by $2,000 from your showing up at my concert, and then you fail to show up, okay? Well then what you have done is, by you not showing up, what have you done? You've reduced that surplus, right? It's now $2,000 smaller than it was. It's now zero. So what should you do? You would have created, by your showing up, $2,000 in value to me, and maybe created value to you, of course, because otherwise you wouldn't have shown up. But what should you do, if we're going to make an efficient way of doing this, is that you should be liable for what the expectation, it's in a sense like perfect compensation, like we were talking about perfect compensation and tort liability. We're talking about you should be pay the people whatever the expectation was, that whatever they would have gained from this contract being enforced. All right, so that should be the remedy for breach. And again, we're going to come back to this in a moment and look at it a little more detail. If you're sort of thinking forward a little bit, you also want the other party to take precaution about what happens if something happens like COVID and then, the thing doesn't happen anyway, right? So, we can think, remember when again, sort of getting ahead of things, but if you think about when we were talking about assigning property rights, right? And what we have is compensation. You could have a forced sale, right, where you could violate the property right and then pay the people the compensation if it was better for that. We're going to come back to that similar idea when we talk about contract law in a little more detail in a moment. If we just think about a criticism of this thing that says, okay, of this idea that you have to have compensation, right? Or you have to have a payment of some kind. If that's the third thing that has to happen, right? There has to be a payment for the consideration. What happens if we haven't had time to have the compensation be paid, but we both want it to be enforceable, okay? So here's a contract. We both want it to be enforceable, but I don't have time to make the, I want to have the thing start before the compensation could happen. So for example, let's just give you, this is a compensation about this, right? Criticism, it's a criticism about this third thing that we were talking about, the compensation payment, okay, or consideration, right? I don't want to say compensation. I really want to say consideration. That is the payment, right? So the third thing that had to happen for the contract to be enforceable is there had to be a payment, right? What if I'm a donor to Hillsdale College, okay? And I'm going to give you $15 million, right? So we have the idea as a donor is going to give $15 million to the college, and to what? To build a let's say to build a should we say a chapel? We'll put a chapel, right? To build a chapel, okay? And so what wants to happen is the donor really wants you to build this chapel. They're going to give you the $15 million if you build the chapel. And what happens is it's going to take a while for the donor to get money out of their donor trust or whatever, right? So there's going to be a time lag for the donor to get the $15 million. Okay, and we want to start building the building before before the weather gets bad, right? So we want to start building before the weather gets bad. So both parties want to have this thing enforceable, right? Both parties want to have this as a contract. I want the college to start building the building, or the donor wants the college to start building the building. The college wants to start building the building, but it's going to, so both parties want, but if they start building the building, they want to make sure they're going to get the $15 million, right, from the donor. And so both parties want to have this enforceable, but the consideration hasn't taken place yet. So it may be, if you again, when you're deciding when is a contract enforceable, that's one of the things you need to think about. What happens if both parties want it to happen? So let's use, again, now we'll start to use a little bit of economic theory here. This is the section that that the authors have labeled Roman numeral 2, right? Economic theory of enforcement. So economic efficiency would happen if both parties want this to happen, right? If both parties, what we just said here, if both parties want it enforceable, right? At the time that the bargain happens, we'll say at the time of the agreement, then you ought to enforce it. Because if I'm the college and I don't know that this is going to be enforced, I'm not going to start building the building, right? And if I'm the donor and I really want to get the thing going, I want the college to know that they're going to get their $15 million, right? Even though I don't have it right now, because I want them to get started on the building. So if both parties want to have it enforced, we'd like to know that it is enforceable, even though the consideration hasn't happened. So notice, what is this really about? It's really about the problem that you have a deferred exchange, right? right? That is, there's a time lag involved. You don't have to deal with this if you walk into Market House and you just bargain with Market House in the sense that you say, hey, I'll give you $2.98 for this box of cereal, and Market House says, okay, I agree on the $2.98, and so the exchange happens, right? I don't need a contract to do that because it happens instantly, right? How many have ever watched Popeye the Sailor? Is that it? Raise your hand if you've really watched Popeye the Sailor. Okay. I can't believe all of you don't raise your hand. Okay. Great TV show when I was a kid growing up, Popeye the Sailor. Well, there's anybody heard of Wimpy, who is one of the characters in the Popeye the Sailor? No? It's too bad. Anyway, you ought to get on YouTube and just put Wimpy Popeye the Sailor, okay? Because Wimpy would always come on and, almost every show, and he would say, he was the sort of heavy-set, weird-looking character, and he'd say, I will gladly pay you on Tuesday for a hamburger today, right? I will gladly pay you on Tuesday for a hamburger today, right? So what was that? That was, he was trying to get a bargain, right? And so if what we have here is, what are contracts about, right? Contracts are about the fact that you're going to give something to somebody right now, and then that you're the promisee, right? And you're going to get something from the promisor later on, right? And the problem is that there's a delayed exchange. That's why you have to deal with contracts. So, and again, what are you trying to do? You're trying to maximize cooperative surplus, right? If we sort of think back to what we were talking about earlier, you're trying to maximize cooperative surplus. I want bargains to happen, okay? Because when a bargain happens, the only reason the bargain happened, the only reason you bought my guitar or you bought my car or whatever, is that there was a cooperative surplus involved. One person's valuing it more than what they're giving up, and the other person is getting more than the opportunity cost of what they're giving up in order to make the thing come into existence. So again, if you think about game theory, if you think back to, the little introduction that we did to game theory, we can use that to think through and notice that you're more likely to reach a bargain if you know the other party will cooperate, right? You're more likely to reach a bargain if you know the other party's going to cooperate. So I'm more likely to agree with you to do something if I know that you're really going to fulfill the promise, right? And so, but what do I know? It's sort of like the prisoner's dilemma in the sense, right? Remember, the prisoner's dilemma was that I have a dominant strategy to cheat, right, rather than cooperate. So each party has a dominant strategy to cheat rather than cooperate. But the cooperative strategy benefits both of them more than the dominant strategy does. So what do? You have a law, right? Thou shalt not steal, okay? So where does thou shalt not steal show up in the Ten Commandments? It shows up as a solution to the prisoner's dilemma. Now, I happen to go to Catholic grammar school and high school, and they never explained the Ten Commandments that way, okay? But if you sort of think that, once you're an economist, you sort of put economics into everything, right? So that could be a solution to the prisoner's dilemma. And so you have a similar situation here. That is, I'm more likely to bargain with you if I know that you are going to fulfill the bargain, right? And so, but you know that if there's no enforcement, right, you're going to accept my money, and then you're not going to fulfill that bargain. And I know that you know that. So if there's not a mechanism to enforce the bargain, then what's going to happen? There's going to be fewer bargains that are out there. So the idea here then is that Enforcement is a mechanism to maximize this cooperative surplus in that I'm more likely to have the bargain if I know there's going to be some enforcement of the bargain. So that's why you would, again, what we're dealing with is transactions that happen over time. Now, what about breach of contract and what the remedies should be against breach? So we're going to look at breach a little more detail here using economic theory. We're thinking about remedy for breach. What am I thinking about? We'll call this Roman numeral 3 because that's what the authors do. But again, it's like tort law. I want both parties to take efficient precaution. Right? Just like when we were talking about tort law. I want the promisor to take efficient precaution against breach. Right? They're going to make sure that they have more than one way of getting the band to the venue. Okay? Or the band's going to leave 2 hours early in case there's a traffic jam if they're driving or whatever. Okay? So you want to have a precaution, and so what should I do if I fully compensate you, right? If I fully compensate the promisee, then what's going to happen is I'm going to undertake efficient precaution, if you sort of think about that. And so what I would want to do is I'll take proper precaution, because if you fail to fulfill the promise, then what happens is the promisee is going to lose this cooperative surplus that you would have had, or their share of the cooperative surplus. And so what we'd like to have is perfect expectation damages. Just like in tort, what did we have? Perfect compensation, right? In tort, what we did is we said we're going to have perfect compensation where if you violate, if you have the accident, what's going to happen? You're going to restore the person to their original utility function, because you're not doing something that makes both parties better off. You're avoiding a damage to one person. But you got a similar concept here in that I would like to make it so that you take precaution so that the perfect expectation of what the promisee would have received would have happened. So rather than perfect compensation in terms of the tort, we're going to have perfect expectation damages is the equivalent of the perfect compensation that you had under the accidents, because I want to make it so that because there's a benefit to this thing happening rather than the cost of this thing happening when there's an injury, and I've just got to get you back to your old indifference curve. Here, there's the indifference curve that you could have been on if the other party could have been on had you fulfilled the contract. We want you to take precaution to make sure that you're going to show up at that point. Now, what does that do? That gives the promisor the promisor then will take efficient precaution, or has an incentive to take efficient precaution. That is, they're going to look, okay, again, like in tort, what's the expected cost to me of having the band leave 2 hours earlier, right? Or what's the expected cost of having a backup helicopter or something like that, right? So what you're looking at, what's the expected cost of the extra precaution, and what's the benefit from you of undertaking that precaution, right? It's going to be the expected surplus that's out there for the person that's the promisee, right? What's their expected value from the contract being fulfilled. So the perfect expectation damages gives the promisor the proper incentive to perform or to breach. Again, it's again similar to this idea of perfect compensation, trying to get the person back to the utility curve, but here is a question of they would have been in a higher utility curve because some positive is happening rather than trying to avoid a negative from happening. What's the problem? The problem here is then, what about reliance? Right? If we think about reliance, then what do I want to do is I would like to have the promisee not overly rely. I want the promisee to take some precaution too. I want the promisee to take some precaution. That is, I don't want him to overly rely on that you're going to deliver, right? So if I had, again, like tort law, I want both parties to take precaution here. So I not only want you, you're the band, I want you to take precaution to get there, but I don't want the venue to go out and have a 3,000 seat venue instead of 2,000 seats or whatever, or change the size of the venue or whatever. I don't want the person that's the promisee to be overly relying on what's going to happen. I want them to take some precaution that, hey, something might happen, right? They might be flying, the band might be flying in an airplane and weather gets bad and they can't land there and da-da-da-da, right? That's a possibility of that happening. So I want you, the people that are running the show, I want you to take proper precaution. And so if, I got to worry about on this side, that is if what I do is I give perfect compensation, right, for the expectation of what could happen, I'm going to have it so that the promisor undertakes proper precaution, but the promisee won't. So I got to have some mechanism to make it so that there's not over-reliance. So again, remember that when we were talking about why you introduced negligence, when we were talking about tort law, right? It's hard to get both parties, no liability gives one party the efficiency, and if you have strict liability, it gives the other party one, so it's hard to get them both. So we had the idea of negligence. You got the similar idea here in contract law. That is, if you give perfect expectation damages, then there's an incentive for the promisor to do the right thing in terms of how much they're going to, precaution they're going to take. But then that gives the person that is the promisee, they may over rely, right? They don't take any precautions. All right. That takes us to Section 4, interpretation of contract. If you look through the if you look in the textbook. And so what we'll be doing is we will look on for Monday, we will probably get through the idea of relational contracts. That is, how do you develop a relationship with somebody so that rather than the courts deciding, you guys enforce it yourself, right? You always have the same contractor come over and you've been doing it for 20 years or whatever, right? Okay, so read through, why don't you get yourself about at least halfway through chapter 8 for Monday.